You sold everything in silence. The truck, the business, the four-bedroom house with the pool, nobody used more than 6 times a summer. The country club membership your father-in-law was so proud you'd earned. Nobody noticed you'd already won. They thought you were starting over. You were finishing something. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday. By Friday, there was an offer. A month later, the keys were in someone else's hands, and you were standing in an empty garage that used to hold 2 trucks and a boat you'd used 4 times in 3 years, listening to your own footsteps echo off concrete you'd swept 100 times without ever really looking at it. Your neighbor, a man named Doug who'd lived across the street for 11 years, waved at you most mornings and never learned much beyond your first name, came over while the moving truck was still in the driveway. "Everything all right?" he asked, in the specific tone people use when they've already decided the answer is no and are just waiting for you to confirm it. You told him everything was fine. Better than fine, actually. You just didn't say that second part out loud, because explaining it would have taken longer than either of you had patience for, and because some explanations only sound true once enough time has passed for the listener to actually believe them. Doug gave you the nod people give when they don't believe you, but don't want to push. "Rough year, huh?" he said. It wasn't a question. You let him have that. You let everyone have that. For almost 2 years. The business was a commercial landscaping company you'd built from a single truck and a push mower into 11 employees, 4 contracts with regional shopping centers, and a reputation, in your corner of the industry, as the guy who showed up on time and never cut corners on the irrigation work other companies routinely botched. It took 9 years to build. In its best year, it generated just under $1.1 million in revenue, with a net margin that hovered, depending on fuel costs and the occasional bad equipment season, somewhere between 12 and 18%. By every measure the people around you could see, you were doing well. The truck looked good. The house looked better. Your wife's family, who'd never quite believed landscaping was a real business until the numbers started speaking for themselves, had started talking to you differently at the holidays. What nobody around you could see, because there was no reason for them to look, was the part underneath the business that had slowly started to feel like a structure built on a single load-bearing wall. 3 of your 4 shopping center contracts ran through the same regional property management company. One person there, a contracts manager who'd been generally fair to deal with for 6 years, made the renewal calls. You'd watched 2 competing landscaping companies lose contracts at other properties when that exact kind of single-point dependency finally caught up with them, usually because of a leadership change nobody saw coming. You'd been turning this risk over in the quiet way you turn over things you can't immediately fix. Not panicking about it, just aware of it. The way you're aware of a crack in a foundation that hasn't moved in years but hasn't gone away either. The decision didn't arrive in a single moment. It arrived as an accumulation of small, unglamorous observations over about 14 months. You stumbled onto something called a sale-leaseback almost by accident, while researching equipment financing for a new fleet of mowers. The structure let businesses sell real assets, vehicles, equipment, even buildings, to an investor while leasing them straight back for continued use, turning illiquid ownership into deployable cash without disrupting operations. It wasn't built for what you eventually did with the idea, but it cracked open a question you'd never let yourself ask directly. What is this business actually worth if I stopped working in it tomorrow? And is that number bigger or smaller than I think? You hired a business valuation specialist, a quiet, precise man named Walt Pruitt, who specialized in lower middle market service businesses, charging $4,800 for a formal valuation most of your competitors would have written off as an unnecessary expense. Walt's number came back at $1.4 million as a going concern, assuming a buyer who'd keep running it under the existing contracts and management structure. You sat with that number for 3 weeks before letting yourself fully process what it meant, not because it was small, and because it confirmed something you'd suspected and hadn't wanted to confirm. However solid the business looked from the outside, it was worth significantly more as a transaction than as something you stayed personally tied to for another decade of fuel prices and contract renewals you didn't control. You didn't tell your wife the full plan right away. You told her you were exploring options, which was true, the way vague statements usually are, technically accurate while hiding the actual shape of the thing. The actual shape of it was this: sell the business to a regional consolidator who'd spent 2 years quietly buying up landscaping companies across 3 states. building a platform they planned to eventually sell to private equity. Sell the house, which had appreciated far more than either of you had tracked closely, in a market that had unexpectedly heated up 2 towns over from where you actually wanted to live. Sell the boat, the second truck, the country club membership nobody used beyond the 4 annual events that required it. Convert almost everything illiquid into cash and a handful of deliberately boring assets, then disappear, financially, from the version of your life everyone around you had spent a decade watching you build. Your wife's first question, when you finally laid the whole shape of it out at the kitchen table on a Sunday night, wasn't about the money. "What do we tell people?" she asked. You told her the truth. Nothing. We tell people nothing, because there's no version of this conversation that doesn't sound like either we're in trouble or we're showing off, and both of those are worse than just letting them assume whatever they want. She sat with that for a long time. Then she asked the only question that actually mattered. "Are you sure this is smarter than just growing it?" You told her you weren't sure of anything except the math. And the math said $1 locked inside a business, dependent on 3 contracts, and your own physical ability to keep showing up, was worth meaningfully less than the same dollar spread across things that didn't need you at all. The consolidator's offer came in at $1.35 million, a little below Walt's valuation, which Walt said was normal for a strategic buyer absorbing your contracts into a bigger platform. You negotiated a 6-month transition where you'd stay on as an advisor at a modest consulting rate, partly because the buyer wanted continuity with the shopping center clients, partly because you wanted time to figure out what came next without the specific terror of having absolutely nothing to do on a Monday morning. The house sold 17 days after listing, $612,000, to a young couple who reminded you uncomfortably of yourselves a decade earlier, full of the particular optimism people have before they understand what a mortgage actually costs them in flexibility over time. The boat sold for $14,000 to a stranger from a boating forum who drove 4 hours to pick it up and never asked a single question about why you were selling it, which you appreciated more than almost anything else that happened that whole stretch. The country club membership simply lapsed. Nobody called to ask why. You found that, in its own small way, more revealing than almost any conversation you'd had in years about what that membership had actually meant to anyone, including you. By the time the dust settled, 6 months after that kitchen table conversation, you had just over $2.1 million in liquid and near-liquid assets, a consulting check that would taper off over the next half year, and a rented 2-bedroom townhouse in a quieter part of the same general area, the kind of place that looked, from the outside, like a step down. Doug, the neighbor, became the unofficial narrator of your downfall to anyone who'd listen. Lost the business, he told a mutual acquaintance at a hardware store, a story you only heard secondhand, months later, through your wife's sister. Had to sell the house fast too. Real shame. Seemed like such a solid guy. You didn't correct it. Somewhere in those 6 months you'd made peace with the specific discomfort of letting people believe a less flattering, less accurate version of your life, because correcting them would have meant explaining a strategy that depended entirely on nobody understanding it. You deployed the $2.1 million slowly and unglamorously over the next 18 months. A small multi-tenant industrial building, the kind nobody bothers photographing for real estate listings, generating steady triple net income from 3 tenants who'd been there for years with no sign of leaving. A handful of single-family rentals in a market 2 states over that you'd researched extensively but never set foot in until after closing. A diversified investment account managed with a level of caution that occasionally made you laugh, given everything that had led to it existing. You drove a 2014 pickup you'd kept from the old fleet, the least valuable one, the one nobody had wanted as part of the business sale. You wore the same work boots you'd worn the last 4 years running the landscaping company, because they were comfortable, and you saw no reason to replace functional things with newer versions of the same function. You ran into the consolidator's regional manager at a gas station, 11 months after the sale, he asked, with the specific awkwardness of someone unsure how much sympathy was appropriate. How you were doing. Doing all right, you told him. Staying busy. He nodded like he understood something he didn't, and you let him. The test of the whole strategy arrived 8 months after the sale closed, right as the regional shopping center market your old business had depended on went through exactly the contraction you'd been quietly worried about for over a year. The property management company that controlled 3 of your old contracts changed ownership. The new owners consolidated vendor relationships aggressively, cutting 2 of the 3 landscaping contracts you used to hold in favor of a national vendor with better volume pricing. The consolidator who'd bought your business lost roughly 40% of its revenue base in a 6-week stretch. You heard about it through Walt Pruitt, who'd done valuation work for 2 other companies in the same consolidator's portfolio, and mentioned it almost in passing on an unrelated call. You sat with that for a long time after hanging up. You didn't feel triumphant. You felt something closer to a held breath finally letting go. The specific relief of watching a risk you'd flagged 14 months before anyone else seemed to notice it actually materialize. Exactly the way you'd modeled it, on a timeline that confirmed the entire premise of everything you'd quietly done. Your industrial building's 3 tenants didn't care about shopping center contract consolidation. Your single-family rentals 2 states over didn't care. Your diversified account, built specifically to not depend on any single point of failure, registered the broader market movement the way diversified accounts do, as noise, not crisis. You thought about the people in your old industry who hadn't sold, who were now navigating exactly the contraction you'd modeled and exited ahead of. You felt no satisfaction at their expense. Mostly, you felt the quiet confirmation of having correctly read a structural risk that nobody around you had been positioned to see. Your wife's family hosted Thanksgiving 14 months after the sale. Your father-in-law, the same man who'd once been visibly proud of the country club membership, asked, during a quiet moment in the kitchen, how things were going, with the particular gentleness people use when they assume the answer needs gentleness. "We're doing okay," you told him. "Figuring things out?" He patted your shoulder in a way meant to be supportive that landed, instead, as faintly pitying. He mentioned, carefully, that there might be an opening at his old company, something in operations, if you were interested. No pressure, just wanted you to know the door was open. You thanked him. You told him you'd think about it. You didn't think about it, because by then you had just over $2.4 million in net assets, generating roughly $14,000 a month in combined passive income, more than your old business had reliably cleared after expenses most months. With none of the contract concentration risk that had quietly worried you for over a year before you finally acted on it. Your wife caught your eye across the kitchen during that exchange. Neither of you said anything. You'd both learned by then that some corrections simply weren't worth making, that letting her father believe you needed rescuing cost nothing, and preserved something neither of you could fully put into words, a kind of dignity that had nothing to do with the actual numbers, and everything to do with not turning your life into a performance for people who'd already decided which story they wanted to believe. 2 years after the for sale sign went up in your old driveway, Doug spotted you at a different hardware store, a coincidence neither of you had engineered, in a part of town neither of you currently lived in. For a moment, he looked genuinely surprised to see you looking well. Not rich, not visibly different, just steady, unhurried, the way people look once something underneath them has stopped wobbling. "Things turning around?" he asked, the same tone he'd used 2 years before, just inverted now, hopeful instead of pitying. "Things are good," you told him, true, complete, and revealing nothing. He seemed satisfied with that. You both moved on to the actual reason either of you was in a hardware store, which had nothing to do with each other's finances, and everything to do with a leaking faucet and a sprinkler head, the kind of ordinary errand that makes up most of an ordinary life, no matter what's sitting quietly in an account neither person mentions. You drove home in the old pickup. You stopped for gas. You checked your phone in the parking lot. An automated notification from your property manager about a routine maintenance request at the industrial building. Completely unremarkable, completely fine. You thought, briefly, about the for sale sign in the old driveway, about how Doug's face had looked that first week, certain he was watching someone's life come apart. He hadn't been wrong that something had ended. He'd just been wrong about what. Here's what selling everything in silence actually feels like, 2 years out, once the dust has fully settled and the story everyone believed has calcified into something nobody bothers questioning anymore. It feels like a gas station parking lot and a maintenance notification you barely have to think about. It feels like letting your father-in-law offer you a job out of pity, saying thank you, and meaning it, because the pity costs you nothing, and the correction would have cost you something you couldn't fully name. It feels like driving the least valuable truck from a business you sold for over $1 million. because the truck still runs and you've never needed anyone to know what you could actually afford. Nobody throws a parade for the decision that actually works. The parade goes to the dramatic comeback, the public reinvention, the story with a clean before and after that fits in a caption. What you did doesn't fit in a caption, it barely fits in a conversation, which is exactly why you stopped trying to have the conversation at all. You didn't lose the business. You didn't lose the house. You read a risk 14 months before it became unavoidable, and you moved while everyone around you assumed moving meant failing. This week, think about the thing in your life that everyone would read as a setback if they only saw the surface of it. Maybe it actually is one, but maybe, like a for sale sign in a driveway on an ordinary Tuesday, it's the exact opposite, and the only person who needs to know the difference is you.